Lying on the center of the East Sea, Vietnam enjoyed great opportunities for trade expansion and socio-economic development on the one hand, but also faces big challenges in the course of national maritime sovereignty protection.
Con tàu mang tín hiệu trong đất liền, mắt em nhìn theo con tàu đi xa mãi, giữa nơi biển khơi đang nở rộ ngàn bông hoa san hô, cánh hoa đỏ thắm bao hy vọng anh
The Nguyen dynasty, the last feudal court in the history of Vietnam, paid great attention to the development of its waters and islands. King Minh Mang, who ruled from 1820 to 1840, left impressive marks on the exploration, management and protection of the country's seas and islands. He changed the kingdom's name to Dai Nam and had the 9 sacred cauldrons made to place in the ancestors' temple to remind later generations of the task to protect the country forever. The 9 sacred cauldrons are a real piece of art made of bronze depicting all the geographical places, produce and the course of nation building by the Nguyen dynasty, including its exploitation of the East Sea under King Gia Long's court, when the first national flag was flown on the Hoang Sa, Paracel, and Truong Sa, Spratly, islands to reiterate our sovereignty. The spiritual value of the 9 sacred cauldrons is the message of our ancestors for successive generations of Vietnamese to protect national boundaries, including the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa islands. The Minh Mang court left a historical record of the country's precious treasures. This is an open exhibition of all the most precious images, scenic places, historical heritages and rare produce of Vietnam, especially those in the East Sea, marking with clear scripts of Dong Hai, EC. Each image bears a script to identify its name and serves as a historical and material evidence that would live forever with the generations of Vietnamese. In 1816, King Gia Long officially had the national flags flown on the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa islands to affirm our sovereignty in these areas. Under King Minh Mang's court, the Nguyen dynasty continued to install stone steels and poles and grew trees on these islands. The Hoang Sa team, which was also in charge of the North Sea group, was tasked with exploitation, surveillance and tax collection over the population on the island. It also conducted patrol and protected the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa islands per se. These activities were conducted continuously until the French came to Indochina. Throughout 3 centuries, from the 17th to the 19th, the Vietnamese feudal state had incessantly observed its sovereignty over the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa islands in a peaceful, continuous way without any objection or dispute from any other country. With the signing of the Paternotre Agreement on June 6, 1884, between the Nguyen dynasty and the French government, France now represented Vietnam's interest in the latter's external relations, helping it protect its sovereignty and territorial integrity, including the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa islands. On October the 17th, 1887, the French president signed an order to establish the post of Governor-General of French Indochina. As the representative of Vietnam, the French government conducted many activities to consolidate Vietnam's sovereignty over the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa Islands. French military vessels regularly patrolled the East Sea areas, certainly including the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa Island. On June the 14th, 1899, the Indochina Governor-General Paul Doumer asked the French government to construct a lighthouse in Hoang Sa Island to further affirm sovereignty here and guide passing by vessels in the area. However, this plan was not successful due to budget problems. In the 1920s of the 20th century, French Navy ships of Indochina increased their patrol in the Hoang Sa area to combat smuggling. Despite the French protectorate regime, the Nguyen Royal Court still lost its right of self-determination, including the right to conduct external relations. However, this royal court continued to enjoy nominal representation of the country. As such, when the government of the Republic of China requested the provision of data on sovereignty over the islands in the East Sea, the court's Minister of Defense, Tan Chong Hui, on March 3, 1925, represented the royal court in Hue to reiterate Vietnam's sovereignty over the Hoang Sa Islands in an official letter which wrote, "The Hoang Sa Islands always belonged to Vietnam, and this is undeniable." This was further confirmed in the report dated January the 22nd, 1929, of Le Pho, the French governor in central Vietnam. He wrote, Tan Chong Hui, former Minister of Defense, who died in 1925, confirmed in his letter dated March 3rd that year that these islands always belonged to An Nam, i.e. Vietnam. There was nothing to dispute over this issue. On March the 8th, 1925, the Indochina Governor-General, Marshal Henry Merlin, announced that the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa Islands came under the French territory. The French protectorate government solemnly declared its sovereignty and increased its patrol, control, and research activities in the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa Islands. In 1925, the Department of Fisheries of Oceanography of Indochina dispatched the De Lanassan ship to conduct oceanographical survey in the Hoang Sa Islands. Apart from Dr. A. Krempf, the then director of the department, the team also had other scientists like Delacour, Jabouille, and others to make the geological and biological researches here. After 2 years of study, Dr. Krempf, director of the Oceanographical Institute, came to the conclusion that the Hoang Sa Islands are part of Vietnam. In 1927, the De Lanassan vessel made a research trip to Truong Sa Islands. The French administration installed a meteorological station on Hoang Sa Island and a wind meter station in Ba Binh Island. These two meteorological stations are still recognized internationally. In November 1928, the governor of South Vietnam issued a license for mine study in Truong Sa Islands to the new Bac Ki Phosphorus Company. In 1929, the Perrier de Rouville team proposed the installation of 4 lighthouses to the 4 corners of the Hoang Sa Islands, namely on the islands of Chi Ton, Da Bac, Ling Con, and the Bombay Shoal. The French administration showed its responsibility to represent the An Nam administration in the protection and consolidation of the latter's sovereignty over the Hoang Sa Islands. In a letter to the French Foreign Minister dated February the 18th, 1929, the Minister for Navies and Colonies confirmed that over a group of uninhabited islands, Annam has hard to contest historical rights as against the rights that of the Republic of China might claim, and France is the country that has the obligation to protect the territorial integrity of its protectorate. In his letter dated March the 20th, 1930, the Indochina Governor-General wrote to the French Minister for the Colonies that it is necessary to recognize the benefits that France could enjoy in acting on behalf of Annam to claim sovereignty over the Hoang Sa Islands. On April the 13th, 1930, the La Malicieuse, manned by Captain de Latre, arrived in Truong Sa Islands under the order of the Indochina Governor-General to install a sovereignty mark, occupying the Truong Sa Islands and others in the adjacent areas. De Latre, the captain of La Malicieuse, established a report on the formal occupation of Truong Sa Island, which said, "Today, on the 13th of April, 1930, and day of the branch Sunday, in the name of France, I have occupied Truong Sa Island, located at 8 degrees 39 north and 111 degrees 55 east, Greenwich, and the adjacent waters. I have raised the French flag on Truong Sa Island and fired a round of 21 cannon shots." On September the 23rd, 1930, France sent a diplomatic note on the occupation of the islands to the related countries. On July the 26th, 1933, France released another note on the occupation of the islands in Truong Sa Archipelago on its official gazette. To facilitate its management, on December the 21st, 1933, the governor of Cochin, China, M.J. Krautheimer, signed a decree to merge the islands of Truong Sa, Anbang, Ba Bing, Ituaba, the Songtu group, Loi Ta and T2 into the territory of the Ba Ria province. In 1937, France dispatched Gautier, a public works engineer, to Hoang Sa Islands to find a place for the construction of a lighthouse and landing field for amphibious aircraft. Also in 1937, the French cruiser La Motte Piquet, commanded by Rear Admiral Estava, visited Hoang Sa Islands. France also established a meteorological station here, coded 48.919, by the International Meteorological Organization, now the World Meteorological Organization. On the 29th day of the third month of the Tiger Year of 1938, King Baodai gave the order number 10 to change the administrative management of Hoang Sa as follows. The islets of Hoang Sa have been under the sovereignty of Annam for long, and under the former royal courts belong to Nam Ngai province. Under the court of King Gia Long, that arrangement was retained because all communications with those islets were conducted via the province of Nam Ngai. Thanks to the advancement of marine transport and current changes, while at the same time there are reports and recommendations by the officials of the Annam Royal Court who have to inspect those islets, together with the representatives of the Protectorate administration, on the merge of those islets into the boundaries of Tua Tien Province. I hereby approve the merge of those islets into the territory of Tua Tien Province. All administrative procedures here would be conducted by the mayor of this province. On June the 15th, 1938, Indochina Governor-General Jules Brevet signed a decree on the establishment of an administrative unit in Hoang Sa Islands, under the province of Tua Tien. Also in 1938, France installed a stone mark to confirm sovereignty, constructed a lighthouse, meteorological station and radio station in Hoang Sa. The stone mark installed in Hoang Sa reads, Republic of France, Kingdom of Annam, Hoang Sa Islands, 1816, Pat Island, 1938. King Gia Long installed a flag in 1816 in Hoang Sa to affirm Vietnam's sovereignty over the islands, and later installed a stone mark in 1938. France also had a meteorological station and radio station built on Ba Binh Island in the Truong Sa Islands. There are many documents and literature in 1939 showing the exercise of sovereignty by France on behalf of Annam. On January the 28th, 1939, the Indochina Governor-General issued a decree on allowances and benefits for administrative officials working at or inspecting Hoang Sa. There was another order on the award of honourable title to Mr. Louis Fantin, in charge upon his demise due to fever in Hoang Sa in February 1939.
Trong cái tập cho bạn này có 35 tờ cho bạn liên quan đến nhiều vấn đề dưới thời Vua Bảo Đại.
In this precious document, there are 35 pages relating to many issues of King Bao Dai's court in 1939 alone.
Do tòa khâm sứ gửi qua cho
in an attachment written in French prepared by the Governor's office and sent to the then Royal Chancellor Pham Quỳnh to propose the posthumous honouring of a French captain died in Hue Hospital after his tour of duty to Hoang Sa Archipelago. The document was dated February the 2nd, 1939.
Để sau khi vua Bảo Đại đọc xong cái văn bản này thì thấy rằng mặc dù ở đây là có yếu tố ngoại.
Having read the document, King Bao Dai noticed that despite the foreign element of the issue, as although the French were dominating Vietnam, but Louis Fontaine participated in the protection of Hoang Sa, the king wrote, adopted with a BD signature, i.e. Bao Dai.
Và bên dưới là cái chữ BD, tức là Bảo Đại.
Indochina Governor-General Jules Brevet's decree dated May the 5th, 1939 to amend the decree of June the 15th, 1938 and establish the two agencies for Croissant and adjacent islands and Amphitrite and adjacent islands was another evidence. During the beginning of the Second World War in 1939 and its end in 1945, France and the Vietnamese state headed by King Bao Dai conducted many operations to exercise sovereignty over the islands in Hoang Sa and Truong Sa, merging territories and appointing administrative representatives, deciding on official promotions and others. On May the 17th and August the 12th, 1941 respectively, the Governor of Annam signed 2 decrees relating to an in-charge of the Annam military unit who was dispatched to Hoang Sa and then became the King's administrative representative in An Vinh district and other subordinate communes in Phu Lam Island of Hoang Sa Archipelago. In the Hoang Sa Islands, there are still the graves of Annam soldiers who died during the Second World War and are buried on Hoang Sa and Phu Lam Islands of Hoang Sa Archipelago. On behalf of the Protectorate Government of Vietnam, France also conducted a number of diplomatic activities to affirm sovereignty over the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa archipelagos. On December the 4th, 1931 and April the 24th, 1932 respectively, France expressed its objection to the Chinese government over Guangdong administration's intention to invite bids for the exploitation of guano in Hoang Sa Islands. At the Chinese claims over the Hoang Sa Islands, France had, in 1932 and 1937 respectively, requested China to bring the Hoang Sa Islands issue to the international tribunals for settlement, only at the latter's refusal. On July the 24th, 1933, France informed Japan about its deployment of forces in the key islands of Truong Sa Archipelago and rejected Japan's objection. On April the 4th, 1939, France objected Japan's decision to put a number of islands in the Truong archipelago under its jurisdiction. On November the 26th, 1943, US President Franklin D. Roosevelt British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and the Commander-in-Chief of the Republic of China, Chiang Kai-shek, met and issued the Cairo Communique, making clear their purpose that Japan should be stripped of all the islands in the Pacific which she had seized or occupied since the beginning of the First World War in 1914, and that all the territories Japan had stolen from the Chinese, such as Manchuria, Formosa, and the Pescadores, should be restored to the Republic of China. Chiang Kai-shek, representing China at the conference, did not, however, mention in any instances of the Hoang and Truong archipelagos. The contents of the Cairo Communique were reiterated in the Potsdam Declaration signed by the leaders of the United States, United Kingdom, and China in the Potsdam Conference from July the 17th to August the 2nd, 1945, to set the terms for Japanese surrender. The Potsdam Declaration, signed by Chiang Kai-shek, Chinese representative, did not mention the two archipelagos of Hoang and Truong either. By the end of the Second World War, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam was born, but there was also another Vietnamese state in the country then, i.e. the administration of former King Bao Dai under French protectorate. France continued to act on behalf of that administration to exercise sovereignty over the archipelagos of Hoang and Truong until the conclusion of the Geneva Agreement of 1954. In May 1946, the French High Commissioner in Indochina, Admiral D'Argen Lu, ordered his naval forces to reoccupy the Hoang Islands, writing in his order, "I have decided to let your ship to conduct surveillance operations in Hoang Islands to prepare for the reoccupation of this French colony." Under this order, troops from the l'Escarnouche under Captain Corvette's command and a number of other French naval vessels landed again on the soil of the islands in Hoang archipelago. Also in 1946, France dispatched the Chevreul ship to Ba Binh Island to install a sovereignty seal in Truong archipelago. Later, Chiang Kai-shek forces, under the excuse of demilitarizing the Japanese forces in Indochina, sent 4 naval ships to Ba Binh to occupy the island in December 1946. In 1947, France requested Chiang Kai-shek's ROC forces to withdraw from the islands in Hoang and Truong archipelagos they illegally occupied since the end of 1946. France also deployed its forces to replace these forces and had the meteorological and radio stations rebuilt here. At the same time, France sent a diplomatic note to China confirming its sovereignty over Hoang and requesting for the 3rd time that China should settle the dispute over Hoang by international arbitration. However, China again refused because it never had any legal basis to prove its groundless claim. In 1949, the World Meteorological Organization recognized the meteorological stations built by France in the Hoang and Truong archipelagos, including the Phu Lam, coded 48859, Hoang coded 48860, and Ba Binh, coded 48919. In April 1949, the head of Chancery of King Bao Dai, H.H. Bu Loc, openly reiterated Vietnam's sovereignty over the archipelagos of Hoang and Truong in a press conference. At the same conference, the the French High Commissioner also recognized that the two archipelagos of Hoang Sa and Truong Sa were parts of the Kingdom of Annam and supported Vietnam's position on this dispute. A noteworthy event took place in 1950, that the forces of Bao Dai's national government replaced the French to manage the two archipelagos. In June 1950, the governor of central Vietnam, General Phan Van Giao, visited Hoang Sa, and in October that year, he again came to Hoang Sa to chair the handover ceremony and made a personal report to the Premier Chen Van Hu, saying, "I was deeply moved that my presence amongst the Vietnamese military units provided a certain amount of influence to their morale on the day they took charge of this heavy mission." In early September 1951, the Second World War allies convened a conference in San Francisco to discuss a peace deal with Japan proposed by the United States and the United Kingdom in order to formally end the war in the Asia-Pacific. There were delegations from 51 countries. As a member of the French Union, the Premier of the National Government of Vietnam, Chen Van Hu, participated as the head of the Vietnamese delegation. The San Francisco Conference also dealt with territories in the Asia-Pacific. In his intervention at the conference, the Soviet Union Foreign Minister Andrei A. Gromyko made a 13-point proposal, of which there was a point saying, "Japan recognizes the sovereignty of the People's Republic of China over the archipelagos of Hoang Sa and Truong Sa." With 46 votes against, 3 for and 2 abstained, the conference rejected this Soviet proposal. Right after that, Premier Chen Van Hu, head of the Vietnamese delegation, made an intervention at the conference on September the 7th, 1951, reiterating Vietnam's sovereignty over the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa archipelagos, underlining that, "And as it must be frank to take every opportunity to stifle the seeds of discord, we assert our rights over the Paracel and Spratly Islands that historically were part of Vietnam." All the 51 delegations did not object to the statement of sovereignty of the Vietnamese delegation. In the Treaty of San Francisco, Article 2, Japan renounces all right, title and claim to the Spratly Islands and to the Paracel Islands, i.e. Vietnam's Hoang Sa and Truong Sa Islands. On September the 8th, 1951, participating nations at the conference signed the San Francisco Peace Treaty with Japan. The international recognition of Vietnam's sovereignty over the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa Islands at the San Francisco Conference was an event of important significance in a series of events proving the process of establishment of sovereignty and the peaceful and incessant occupation in reality of the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa Islands by Vietnam. Documents relating to the confirmation of Vietnam's sovereignty over the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa archipelagos under the French domination are mostly preserved in French and British archives and have been studied and analysed by international researchers. French professor Monique Chamillier-Gendreau, author of The Sovereignty over the Paracel and Spratly Archipelagos, published in March 1996, provides extremely objective assessments of the historical and legal evidence of Vietnam's sovereignty over the two archipelagos of the Hoang Sa and Truong Sa.
Dont elle exerce le protectorat, avait des droits sur ces îles.
France discovered that Annam, the country under its protectorate, had established its sovereignty over these islands, and therefore France should act on Annam's behalf to assert this sovereignty over these islands, and they had clearly declared that.
La France dit pas du tout, pas du tout.
In the early 1930s of the 20th century, France expressed its clear position in the communications with China.
Et nous exerçons les droits de souveraineté
In a
au
document
nom du
sent to
protectorat.
China in 1932, France explicitly reiterated that these islands did not belong to China, but the sovereignty here fell into the hands of Annam, and France as its protector.
Pour les Spratlais, c'est un peu différent, parce que comme elles sont géographiquement un peu plus au sud,
In a document sent to China in 1932, France explicitly reiterated that these islands did not belong to China, but the sovereignty here fell into the hands of Annam, and France, as its protector, would exercise this sovereignty over the islands. France sent survey teams, built lighthouses, and established military posts on these islands. In 1930, France sent a military ship to occupy Truong Island, and in 1933 expanded its occupation to a group of islands in Truong archipelago. All through the 70 years since the signing of the treaty with the Nguyen's royal courts in 1884 until the conclusion of the Geneva Agreement in 1954 to end the colonial time in Indochina, France acted on behalf of Annam to exercise sovereignty over the two archipelagos of Hoang and Truong, and at the same time rejected all claims from all other countries over these two archipelagos. When it left Indochina, France handed over the management of Hoang and Truong to Vietnam. Vietnam's sovereignty over these two archipelagos of Hoang and Truong was recognized at the San Francisco Conference, an important international event to settle territorial issues after the Second World War.
Con tàu đi xa mãi giữa nơi biển khơi đang nở rộ ngàn bông hoa sát đô, cánh hoa đỏ thắm bao hy vọng anh gửi về thằng em ơi. Ánh mắt em yêu như biển xanh, như trời xanh trong nắng mới, nhớ cả dáng hình em mùa gặt nặng đôi vai, sóng dù mối tình đời thủy thủ càng thêm vui. Đây con tàu xa khơi, đây con tàu xa.